is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Can the UK leave lockdowns behind as new data shows vaccines having a spectacular impact on hospital admissions?
Back to school in Germany as most states ease coronavirus restrictions, but infections are up again.
China's foreign minister calls for the US to end its suppression of Chinese tech firms and says the door is open for dialogue.
Dozens of Boeing 777s are grounded after an engine fell apart over the US city of Denver.
And all that glitters. Why has China's Spring Festival sparked a gold rush?
Britain's Prime Minister has been outlining plans to bring England out of lockdown, but it won't be the full easing of restrictions that some had called for.
Speaking in Parliament just before we came on air, Boris Johnson said that from March the 8th, the rules will be cautiously lifted in stages, and the priority is getting children back into classrooms. Well, Noeed Jabakil is in London for us. So, Noeed, give us the details of the Prime Minister's announcement.
Yeah, this happening in the last few moments. Robin, Prime Minister Boris Johnson still in there taking questions from some of his colleagues. Let's break it down for you. First things first, the easing of the lockdown here in England will start on the 8th of March, so just a few weeks away, and that will see schools reopen. All school children across England will be allowed to go back to school from the 8th of March, give or take a day or two for logistical reasons. Teaching unions have said that that could be reckless, bringing all pupils back together, but the government says it's their #1 priority. Aside from that, another vulnerable group the government says is a major priority, care homes. From the 8th of March, care home residents will be allowed to have one regular visit. That could be very important, not just for the residents, but people who've been unable to see vulnerable members of their family for most of the past year. And then a bit further on, as part of this first stage, when the rest of the population will start to see an impact from March 29th. New rules will mean that people will be allowed out of their homes and up to 6 people can meet outdoors. Aside from that, there'll also be the resumption of outdoor sports, things like golf and tennis, but also team sports like football as well. And that's just the first stage of this 4-part plan that Boris Johnson is announcing. The other stages go on up until June, and every 5 weeks these will be reviewed. I think the issue of 5 weeks is really important. This gap between stages, it gives the government flexibility to pull the reins back if they need to, but it's also, according to Boris Johnson, allows the science to determine what happens next. Mr. Johnson spoke a short while ago and said that vaccines, the progress that this country has made in terms of vaccination, was one key reason why this lockdown can be eased. Have a listen.
We cannot escape the fact that lifting lockdown will result in more cases, more hospitalisations and, sadly, more deaths. And this would happen whenever lockdown is lifted, whether now or in 6 or 9 months, because there will always be some vulnerable people who are not protected by the vaccines.
The Prime Minister now taking questions from some of his Conservative colleagues, and as you do with these sorts of decisions, as we've seen all across the world, there are sometimes winners, sometimes losers. I think lots of people around the country will be breathing a sigh of relief, a big weight off their shoulders, being told they can go back towards normality, but there are still lots of people who'll be unhappy with the slow pace of this, particularly some of Boris Johnson's Conservative colleagues who say more needs to be opened up even quicker.
But Noeed, when it comes to the vaccine rollout, we've also had some good news about it today.
Yeah, definitely. And don't make no mistake, the vaccine is the game changer here as far as it's concerned. This is the 3rd national lockdown in England, and this time around the government says it's no longer just going to look at cases and hospital numbers and hospitalisations. It's going to consider vaccines as well. That's because more than 17 million people have received a first dose of this jab now here. And latest data out of Scotland suggests that the effectiveness of a first dose could reduce hospitalisation by up to 94%. That's in the case of the Oxford AstraZeneca jab, and in the case of the Pfizer jab, the other one being rolled out pretty much across the UK. Those two, the other one, Pfizer's jab, provides up to 85% reduction in hospitalisation. So really spectacular numbers, as Public Health Scotland called it. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says there were similar numbers according to the vaccines here in London, in England rather. And what that suggests is that these vaccines could offer a lot of help in the government's fight in bringing down transmission as the summer warmer months approach. But as I mentioned, it's not just about vaccinations. Case numbers, deaths still in the thousands here in terms of cases and hundreds in terms of deaths. So this isn't a war that the UK has won, not yet, but this will be a step back towards normality.
Mary Debarco, many thanks.
Well, as you heard, Nuida, there's a patchwork of different lockdown easing plans across the UK. On Monday, schools in Wales and Scotland reopened for the youngest children. John Beaver reports from South Wales.
A phased and flexible return to school is how it's being described. For the past 6 weeks, only the children of critical workers have been allowed to go to school. Those are people like doctors, nurses or police officers. But this opening up is far from a return to normal. Only children in the youngest 3 years of primary schools are back in the classrooms. There is limited published data about how susceptible young people are to catching the virus and then passing it on and causing it to spread. COVID rates in Wales have fallen dramatically since the new year, with rates per 100,000 people at their lowest since September. The country has the lowest rates of the 4 UK nations, but a lockdown will remain in place here for at least the next 3 weeks. The Welsh First Minister took to Twitter to give a message to school-aged children.
The best place for anyone to learn is in school, and that's why we want to get you back into class with all of your friends. I understand that some of you may be a bit worried about going back, but we've worked with some of the best experts in the whole of Wales to make sure it's safe for you to do that.
Not everyone is as convinced when it comes to safety. Teaching unions have expressed concerns about things like the guidelines when it comes to face masks, social distancing, and they've also called for teachers to be urgently moved up the priority list when it comes to vaccinations. Scotland has implemented a similar policy to here in Wales, and both countries are aiming to get all children back into schools within the coming weeks. The decision is about striking a balance between the impact closing schools has on children's education and well-being, with the danger to pupils, teachers and the wider community about potentially increasing the spread of the coronavirus. John Beaver, CGTN, Caldicot, South Wales.
Linda Bold is Professor of Public Health at the University of Edinburgh. She says the UK government is approaching the exit from this lockdown much more cautiously than the last one, and that across Europe, opening should be based on local infection rates.
It's quite a different approach from what we saw in the UK in 2020 in the summer, when there was an easing of that long lockdown that we had, where a number of things changed altogether quite quickly. I think we will hear a different approach today from the Prime Minister, much more cautious easing, learning the lessons of last year and making sure that while we roll out our vaccination programme, we don't risk more people going back into hospital because there's high levels of infection in the community.
And looking overseas, half of Germany's regions, as well as Scotland and Wales, are returning some primary-aged children to schoolrooms this week. In England, it won't be until March the 8th. Why these differences, and how difficult is it to balance the risks of returning children to their classrooms?
So the differences arise because of infection levels. If you look at the ONS infection survey, which is the only UK-wide random sample of people involved in getting regular swabs, you can see that infection rates are significantly lower in Wales and in Scotland than they are in England or Northern Ireland at the moment. And I think that partially drives a slightly later return to school in England. It's also the case, as you say, in some parts of Europe, not just Germany, but Denmark is an interesting example. They returned their primary pupils a week or so ago, and that seems to be going very well, although they've had one school where there has been an outbreak, which we would expect. So it's entirely appropriate that different countries do it at different stages, and that where you have countries that have a federal or a devolved structure, the decisions are made based on the infection levels in those areas.
How worried are you about the new viral variants posing a threat globally? And are border closures the key to containing them?
So the variants are a challenge for our immunization because you can have what we call an escape mutant, which means that there's a variant that poses challenges for vaccination. Reassuringly, so far, we haven't any strong evidence that the current vaccines are not effective against the variants, certainly the Kent, South Africa and Brazilian variants, although more data needed on the latter two. Preventing importation by restricting international travel and having robust quarantine, as many countries in Southeast Asia have led the way on. I think Europe is waking up to the fact now that that needs to be part of our response.
There have been positive signals from Israel, haven't there, about the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, in effect cutting transmission. How significant is this news?
Very encouraging news, and my expectation is that we will see that kind of data from the UK potentially even this week or quite soon. We have had a paper produced by my own colleagues at the University of Edinburgh today showing that for the over 80s, admission to hospital and mortality is significantly reduced by both the vaccines licensed in the UK. So that's very encouraging, and I would expect that vaccines will have an impact on transmission as well.
A pub in Ireland has come up with its own way of keeping the doors open during lockdown. The Tara Naree in County Meath is now a wildlife hospital. Local people have been helping vets care for a steady stream of sick and injured animals. More at europe.cgtn.com. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and Weibo.
And remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all major digital platforms and on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion and, of course, at cgtn.com and on the CGTN app.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, huge crowds defy a military warning in Myanmar for a day of mass protest.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's top diplomat has called for a reset in bilateral ties with the US. On Monday, Wang Yi laid out a vision to revise the relationship, which has been strained by a trade war, tech friction and political accusations. Sun Lan has the story.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi kicked off his work in the Lunar New Year in the fast lane. During a high-level forum on foreign policy on Monday, Wang tackled the most important issue on his agenda, restoring relations with the U.S. by calling for dialogue.
China and the US have different social systems in different stages of development with different cultures and histories, so it is natural that both sides have differences and conflicts. What is key is utilising dialogue to get to know more about each other and not be defined by differences between both countries.
Bilateral ties hit their lowest point under the Trump administration, with almost every single aspect of the relationship affected. With Trump gone and Biden sworn in, Wang hopes a new era in the relations can begin.
We hope that the US will adjust its policies as soon as possible. Among others, remove unreasonable tariffs on Chinese goods, lift its unilateral sanctions on Chinese companies, research and educational institutes, and abandon irrational suppression of China's technological progress.
The US and China have also clashed over issues concerning Hong Kong, Tibet, Xinjiang and Taiwan, issues China considers as its core interests. Wang said for the normalization of the China-US ties, mutual respect is key.
We urge the United States to stop smearing the Chinese Communist Party and China's political system, stop conniving or even supporting the erroneous words and actions of separatist forces for Taiwan independence, and stop undermining China's sovereignty and security on internal affairs concerning Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet.
Chinese officials have been calling for cooperation with the US since Biden took office. As the world gets to know what Biden's America is back mantra means, the Chinese foreign minister is saying clearly the door to dialogue remains open. Sun Lan, CGTN.
Well, could Foreign Minister Wang Yi's speech usher in a new era in the China-US relationship? Well, let's ask our correspondent Jim Spellman, who joins us now live from Maryland. So, Jim, any response yet from the US?
A little direct response out of Washington, which is not unusual in the hours immediately after a speech like this. But we have heard repeatedly from Joe Biden and from the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, that they both consider the relationship with China to be the most important U.S. bilateral relationship, and that while there are areas of cooperation, there are many areas of disagreement. And I want to look at something that we just heard there from Wang Yi when he said, quote, "We urge the U.S. to stop smearing the Communist Party of China and Chinese political system." Well, one of the problems is both Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. find it quite politically advantageous to smear the Communist Party of China and China's political system. And there doesn't appear to be anything in the short term that's going to change that. So as long as it is to the political advantage of both parties here in the U.S. to take a hard line against China, it's hard to see exactly what will happen to change that dynamic, Paul.
And Jim, how does the Biden administration view the China-US relationship? Do we expect any big policy changes?
Well, they're taking a slow approach. So they've launched detailed reviews of trade with China, Chinese technology, military posture in the region, and these reviews are expected to take months. Joe Biden doesn't want to act until he can do a couple of things. One is line up U.S. allies and partners to take action together against Beijing. We're already hearing some complaints from Beijing that that's essentially Joe Biden trying to arrange Western countries to bully China. Joe Biden might even agree with that assessment, but he's doubled down on that in his speech to the G7 on Friday and his speech to the Munich Security Conference as well on Friday. Also, I think it's in Joe Biden's perceived interest to wait until the U.S. is on better footing with the pandemic, both the public health aspects and the economic aspects, so that he can begin serious talks with China from a stronger negotiating position. And when it comes to the issue that you hear Wang Yi talking about there, that the U.S. should stop meddling in what Beijing considers its internal affairs, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, et cetera. Well, there's no indication that Joe Biden is going to stop talking about these issues. He said as much several times already in his month or so as U.S. president. I think the question is, what will Joe Biden do besides simply talk about them, and how far is he prepared to go? Those lines will be key to how this relationship moves forward. Paul?
Okay, thanks so much, Jim. Jim Spellman there in the United States.
Wang Yi has also called for the promotion of human rights through dialogue and cooperation. China's foreign minister says human rights principles must be framed within differing realities faced by countries. He was speaking at the 46th session of the UN's Human Rights Council, which is currently underway, and he addressed reports of abuses in Xinjiang.
There has never been so-called genocide, forced labor, or religious oppression in Xinjiang. Such inflammatory accusations are fabricated out of ignorance and prejudice. They're simply malicious and politically driven hypes and couldn't be further from the truth. The door to Xinjiang is always open. People from many countries who have visited Xinjiang have learned the facts and the truth on the ground. China also welcomes the High Commissioner for Human Rights to visit Xinjiang.
The UK joins the Council this year as a voting member. During his address, Britain's Foreign Minister, Dominic Raab, called for the UN to be given access to Xinjiang to investigate alleged abuses.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights or another independent fact-finding expert must, and I repeat, must, be given urgent and unfettered access to Xinjiang. And if members of this Human Rights Council are to live up to our responsibilities, there must be a resolution which secures this access.
The British Foreign Secretary also spoke about the deteriorating situation in Myanmar. He called on the military to step aside and said civilian leaders must be released. His comments came after hundreds of thousands of protesters staged rallies across the country in one of the largest demonstrations yet against the military takeover. Gao Jiayi reports from Yangon.
People in the big cities across Myanmar, such as Yangon, Naypyidaw and Mandalay, took to the streets on Monday morning during the 5-2 general strike in opposition to the military takeover. The military leadership had warned against Monday's protests in a statement broadcast by the national TV channel MRTV. The statement said that protesters were instigating confrontation and the security forces have the right to fire back. But the military's warning do not stop the people from turning out in their tens of thousands. In Yangon, crowds have gathered on the main streets in the center of the city, denouncing what they call the tyranny of the military. And despite the military warning, this was the largest demonstration since the government was ousted on February the 1st. However, for my personal observation on the scene today, both police and protesters seemed more restrained. In Yangon, there was no big conflict between the two sides and no tear gas and no rubber bullets. But in the capital Naypyidaw, more than 2,000 protesters were detained by security forces on Monday afternoon. At 6 p.m. local time, the protesters dispersed peacefully. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres accused Myanmar's military of brutal force and arrests, and he called for the release hundreds of people detained since February the 1st when addressing the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. Gao Jiayi for CGTN reporting in Yangon.
Italy's ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo has been killed in an attack on a United Nations convoy. Luca Attanasio was travelling with members of the World Food Programme near Goma in the east of the country. Several rebel groups are vying to control the region, which is rich in minerals. An Italian policeman also died in the attack. Ugandan opposition leader Bobi Wine says he's withdrawing a legal petition to overturn the country's election result. The Supreme Court was set to begin hearing evidence this week. The pop singer turned politician said the case would not be heard fairly. President Yoweri Museveni was re-elected in January. The head of the UN's atomic watchdog says Iran has agreed to allow limited monitoring of its nuclear sites for a further 3 months. At the same time, Iran will cut the level of access given to inspectors from Tuesday. Tehran had said all negotiations on reviving the 2015 nuclear deal are off the table until Washington removes economic sanctions. China and India have agreed to pull back troops along a disputed border in the Himalayas. Tension there led to a deadly confrontation last June. On Saturday, soldiers withdrew from the area around the Pangong Lake. Both sides agreed to maintain communication in order to avoid conflict.
Former US President Donald Trump appears to have lost a key legal battle to keep his tax records secret. The US Supreme Court has cleared the way for a New York prosecutor to obtain his tax returns and other financial records. However, the ruling does not mean they'll be made public. Trump's lawyers have yet to respond to the ruling. Donald Trump will send out a strong message that he is still in charge of the Republican Party and that he's the presumptive nominee for the 2024 presidential election. That's according to news website Axios. The former US president will speak at a meeting of the Conservative Political Action Committee in Florida this weekend. Axios quotes a longtime Trump advisor as saying the appearance will be a show of force. People in the U.S. state of Texas are facing steep electricity bills after last week's freezing winter storm. Some lawmakers say they'll try to stop energy companies disconnecting customers and that the state should pay the extra heating costs. Firms have been criticised for raising energy prices when the storm hit. Some customers face bills of thousands of dollars. New Zealand has marked the 10th anniversary of the Christchurch earthquake that killed 185 people. Hundreds attended an outdoor service in the city, which is still being rebuilt. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said it was important to remember that 87 of the victims were from outside the country and that their families were unable to attend due to travel restrictions.
Next, the Spring Festival in China saw glittering sales of gold jewellery, up 80% on the same period last year. Experts predict sales will remain strong as people seek safe assets in a time of global economic uncertainty. Gao Ang reports.
Gold hasn't lost its appeal. According to the China Gold Association, sales rose by more than 80% year-on-year during this year's Spring Festival holiday. It's seen as a safe investment amid global headwinds.
I buy gold jewelry because it keeps its value. Whatever the price of gold, if there are styles that look good, we will buy some.
Experts say the gold rush is partly due to the increasing uncertainties in the global economy and expectations of rising inflation. They say the demand for gold will continue in the long term.
So there is a decline in the dollar's status, and there are very few alternatives for dollars. And a lot of people are expecting that the global inflation will rise given the very aggressive monetary expansion in many of the economies.
But a recovery after the pandemic is expected to bring more stability to prices of commodities, including gold.
Because by then the uncertainty will be lower and people don't have to store up something that doesn't have real value. We have to remember that gold is a precious metal, but it has very little practical use except for jewelry and a little bit for industrial sector.
Despite its shimmering appeal, gold also reflects people's fear of uncertainty and hope for a more stable future. Gang, CGTN, Beijing.
This is Global Business Europe, still ahead. A call to boost vaccine production as richer countries continue to snap up supplies.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first two epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Paul Barber. The headlines again. China's foreign minister has called for the US to end its suppression of Chinese tech firms and says the door is open for dialogue.
Dozens of Boeing 777s have been grounded after an engine fell apart over the US city of Denver.
And Boris Johnson has outlined a roadmap out of lockdown as new UK data shows vaccines having a spectacular impact on hospital admissions.
In Germany, schools and daycare centres are opening in several states, despite concerns over the development of COVID-19 mutations in the country. Some government officials have voiced concern over the restarting of face-to-face education following weeks of closures. Natalie Carney reports.
It's early morning, yet these graduating grade 10 students at the Realschule Weißenhorn in Bavaria are excited to be back in class. On Monday, kindergartens, primary schools to grade 4 and graduating classes went back to school after nearly 2 months of online learning.
I think it's very important. It's different to sit in a class than to learn everything online. I think it's really important that we're all back in class, in contact with the teachers, and just being there in person again.
In normal times, 650 students attend school here from grades 5 to 10, but corona restrictions have students on rotating schedules and the school adhering to all necessary hygiene rules. This is a very important step, says the principals of this middle school.
You absolutely need to have students interact with their friends. These things have not happened for several weeks now.
It is clear to everyone that distance teaching cannot replace face-to-face teaching. That is why our wish and our hope is that we can bring more and more students back to school.
German Health Minister Jens Spahn has spoken of the need for balance between protecting the population and giving children some kind of normal daily life. Yet one of Germany's top virologists has warned against reopening schools too early, citing a number of studies that show school children pose the same risk of infection as adults. German health officials are also concerned about the spread of virus variants across the country, leading to Bavaria's Premier Markus Söder to warn that schools could be closed for a third time if the 7-day incident rate gets too high.
Because ensuring social distance is more difficult in schools and daycare centers, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the heads of the federal states are calling on the Ministry of Health to vaccinate teachers and educators sooner. As it stands, employees of these facilities are currently in priority group number 3, which would mean they are unlikely to get the jab until the summer.
I think it's really important that teachers are also vaccinated because we are here with the students, and it's also really important that we are healthy and, of course, our students are healthy so that we can stay here at school in the classes.
The decision to reopen schools was left to the individual federal states, meaning some have already reopened while others are waiting for numbers to drop further. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Weißenhorn, Germany.
The World Health Organization has hit out at richer countries for hoarding vaccine supplies. The head of the WHO says that some nations are approaching manufacturers directly to secure more doses. His comments followed talks with the German president. Julia Chapman reports.
Vaccine equity dominated discussions between WHO Director General Dr. Tedros and German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier. As richer countries plough ahead with their vaccine drives, poorer ones are dependent on the WHO's COVAX program, which aims to fairly distribute vaccines. Dr. Tedros stressed that vaccine equality is beneficial to everyone.
Starting vaccination in all countries is in the interest of the whole world, because it can help us fight the virus everywhere. If this virus is not defeated everywhere, we cannot defeat it globally. It will have a safe haven somewhere and can strike back, meaning we could be back to square one.
Dr. Tedros said richer countries should bear COVAX in mind when making deals with manufacturers for more doses. He said there were already examples of the COVAX supply being dented by new deals with manufacturers. German President Steinmeier said those actions had political consequences as well as public health ones.
If we refuse to grant solidarity, we must not be surprised if other countries come in to fill this vacuum and use that for their own purposes. The pandemic constitutes a geopolitical moment that will have enormous consequences for the future after the pandemic.
President Steinmeier said the virus will only be overcome when it is overcome everywhere. With that in mind, Dr. Tedros said that significant increase in vaccine production is necessary. He said the WHO is working to facilitate greater collaboration between pharmaceutical companies and to streamline the licensing process. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Budapest.
Several of Hong Kong's top officials have been given coronavirus vaccinations to boost public confidence ahead of a rollout this week. Chief Executive Carrie Lam received her first dose of China's Sinovac. According to the administration, residents will be able to choose whether they're given the Sinovac, Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccines.
Israel has launched a coronavirus green pass system, allowing people who've been vaccinated to access public facilities that would normally be off limits. Stephanie Fried reports from Tel Aviv.
In Israel, as of Sunday, COVID-19 inoculation is a sort of status symbol. Israelis who have gotten both Pfizer vaccine shots or those who have recovered from the virus get a green pass certificate. It's proof of vaccination in the form of a QR code or printout for people without smartphones. The pass allows entry to gyms, swimming pools, hotels, entertainment venues, and sporting events. From March, restaurants and bars will be added to the list.
In the new Green Pass era, this is the front line. These are the people who are responsible for monitoring either people who have recovered from COVID-19 or who are fully vaccinated. If you don't have a green pass, I don't have a green pass.
The new regulation, you won't be able to come and enjoy our equipment.
Businesses caught breaking the rules will be fined. The government is threatening to jail Israelis who forge green passes. Around half of Israel's 9 million residents have gotten at least one shot since the government's vigorous inoculation campaign kicked off in December. But vaccination enthusiasm has waned in recent weeks as increasing numbers of Israelis with health issues and concerns about long and short-term side effects avoid inoculation.
It's insane. It's kind of like they're sanctioning it.
Green Pass privileges and restrictions raise legal and moral questions.
We can definitely see such lawsuits coming of employees, of people who say, I want to go and see a concert, I'm discriminated. We have to remember that if the disease continues spreading, it also ends up bringing more violation of human rights, not just the right of health, but if people have to be in lockdowns again, their freedom of movement is violated, but also their ability to work.
Within the coming weeks, non-vaccinated Israelis will reportedly be allowed entry to Green Pass venues after presenting negative coronavirus test results. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
Dutch authorities say they're investigating after a Boeing 747 cargo plane caught fire and dropped engine parts shortly after takeoff from Maastricht on Saturday. It follows a similar incident in the US on Saturday, where the engine of a Boeing 777 passenger plane also caught fire, causing debris to fall on a residential district. Boeing has remained in the spotlight after its 737 MAX airplanes were grounded for 18 months following two fatal crashes that killed 346 people. Joining us now on the programme is Sally Gethin, an aviation analyst. Thanks very much indeed for being with us today, Sally. So we have these two separate incidents, both involving Boeing planes. Let's talk first about what happened in the United States. Just how serious was it?
It was a very close call, and when you consider there were over 200 passengers on board, how catastrophic that would have been, and also it could have involved bystanders on the ground as well. As we've seen, the debris was spread over a wide area. Very, very concerning, and awful news for Boeing, which is struggling to create a better safety record after the Boeing 737 MAX.
And the UK has now banned these planes with this specific engine type from entering its airspace. What's been the reaction from Boeing and from the companies operating the planes?
Well, Boeing, in fact, issued a recommendation to have this particular aircraft type with this particular engine type, Pratt & Whitney engines, to be grounded. So it's due process, if you like, because the UK CAA is falling in line with that and taking a precautionary step to actually ban that particular aircraft type from airspace. Having said that, that particular type wasn't using UK airspace anyway. It's a precaution.
And Boeing's safety record has already been under scrutiny, as you mentioned, not least after the 18-month grounding of its entire 737 MAX fleet over safety concerns.
Yes, and recently that was cleared for takeoff again and has been seen back up in the skies. So Boeing really doesn't need another incident like this. At the moment, attention and concerns are being placed on the engine and the engine manufacturer, particularly the components of that engine, the fan blades. So it may be a purely engine issue, but having said that, it's the entire aircraft which is the focal point in this.
And what will the impact be on the company itself? It's already, of course, dealing with a huge drop in air travel due to the pandemic.
Yes, well, long-haul travel has been absolutely decimated and is likely to be the slowest to return in the form of air travel recovering in the future. So in that sense, the Boeing 777 won't be a huge loss at this point. I mean, I should add that particular type with those engines. But, Boeing itself has agreed to pay $2.5 billion in compensation over the B737 MAX. It's hemorrhaged billions of dollars last year. So it's really not in great financial shape to come out of this pandemic in the commercial air transport sector.
And what impact might it have on any future models that Boeing is planning to release?
Yes, and indeed, Boeing is placing great emphasis on a new aircraft type based on the B777. The new one will be the B777X. It took its maiden flight around this time last year. The launch of that in terms of delivery to airlines has been delayed because of the pandemic. It's meant to be a more fuel-efficient, newer aircraft combining the best of the B777 and the B787. But obviously, using the B777 heritage there may not play very well at the moment, given that it's an old B777 version. By the way, it dated back to the mid-1990s, the one in the United Airlines incident. But still, it comes under the brand of B777.
OK, Sally Gethin, great to get your thoughts today. Thank you.
Oil prices are on the rise again as production in Texas gets going after last week's winter storm. Crude production in the US states was halted by the extreme weather with a loss in output of up to 4 million barrels a day. Brent crude was up 49 cents a barrel in early trading on Monday. Apple is once again the world's biggest smartphone maker. It's overtaken Samsung for the first time in 5 years. Handset sales have declined overall during the pandemic, but Apple still managed to sell almost 80 million towards the end of last year, following the launch of the iPhone 12.
Australia will press ahead with new laws to make Google and Facebook pay news outlets for content. Last week, Facebook blocked all news items from its feeds in the country. The social media giant said it had talks with Australian politicians over the weekend. Bitcoin slumped as much as 8% on Monday after reaching record highs at the weekend. The cryptocurrency looks set to suffer its worst fall for a month. One of its biggest backers, the billionaire Elon Musk, said he thought Bitcoin was overvalued. However, there are signs it's becoming more popular with mainstream investors. China has replaced France as Germany's second largest export market. Germany sold more than $100 billion worth of goods to China last year. Exports to France dropped 15%. China was the world's only major economy to grow in 2020.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Niagara Falls puts on a spectacular show after weeks of freezing temperatures in the United States.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. EU foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss further sanctions on Russia over the jailing of opposition politician Alexei Navalny. The crisis in Myanmar is also expected to feature in the talks, as well as efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal. Tony Waterman joins us now live from Brussels with more. So, Tony, a number of issues vying for the attention of Europe's foreign ministers.
Yeah, that's right. The big news coming out just now in a press conference is that the European foreign ministers have agreed to push forward with a fresh round of sanctions against officials in Russia who are responsible for the jailing and imprisonment of the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. They're taking very targeted action, and the High Representative Josep Borrell saying that he hopes to put forward exactly what this will look like in the next week so that the Council, by written admission, can put forward their own approval. These travel bans and asset freezes, this is what we are expecting in these sanctions, which are going to target about 6 top Russian officials. This is in addition to the 6 officials who were already sanctioned in October over their alleged involvement in the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. Of course, the Kremlin has denied any involvement in that poisoning. So this is really the top thing taking place. And Josep Borrell saying that it's becoming quite clear that Russia is drifting towards an authoritarian state and that it just does not want to engage anymore with the EU on this issue. Of course, these tensions between the EU and Russia have been mounting for quite a long time now, really dating back years to 2014 during the Crimea crisis. And they are feeling as if there is no room for diplomacy at this point. There was just 2 weeks ago that very rare visit by Josep Borrell to Moscow where he was essentially humiliated by Sergei Lavrov, who during a press conference disparaged the bloc, called it an unreliable partner. And then, of course, the news broke that Russia would be expelling 3 European diplomats over their alleged involvement in pro-Navalny protests that took place. That led to some retaliation from Europe. But these relationships now very much strained, and we're looking at a fresh round of sanctions coming in against top Russian officials.
It sends a very clear message to people who are part of this regime, and maybe this will contribute at least to a small crack, to a small split within the regime, when people start to feel that being close to Putin is not as safe and pretty anymore as it used to be. Even this will be a very important sign.
Tony, how were events in Myanmar and moves on Iran's nuclear deal broached by the ministers?
Well, these were the two other big topics that were discussed in this meeting today, which has literally been going on since the very early hours of this morning. On the Myanmar front, the foreign ministers said that they will, if necessary, push forward with sanctions against the military government there, which led a coup earlier this month, replacing the democratically elected government. And they called for the immediate reinstatement of that democratically elected government and for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and also the country's president. People in Europe have become quite distressed over what we've seen, this intensified violence against protesters in Myanmar, and saying that they could potentially push forward with sanctions. We know that the U.S., the UK, and Canada have already implied or put in sanctions against these military officials. On the Iran front, that what they're really trying to do is just salvage that 2015 deal, which was the former Trump administration pulled out of during his presidency. We have the Biden administration in place now. They would like to see a return to that nuclear deal, and the Secretary of State, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, joined this meeting today to discuss the Iran nuclear deal. He was on that call for about 2 hours. We haven't heard yet the exact outcome of that. The press conference is still ongoing, but there are expectations that there could be an informal discussion between Tehran and Washington, perhaps a decision on that in the coming week. That is what Joseph Borrell has just said, and certainly he and a lot of European diplomats working very intensely behind the scene to try to negotiate and bring both sides together back around the negotiating table.
Tony Waterman reporting live from Brussels. Thank you.
The Chinese mainland reported 11 new coronavirus cases on Monday, all said to be people arriving from abroad. Infections remain low in China, while outbreaks are sporadic and tightly controlled. As Li Juanhua reports, Chinese medical facilities are continuing to expand their testing capacities.
Getting COVID tests has become mandatory for many in recent weeks in China as they travel during the Lunar New Year holiday. Scanning a QR code and filling out a form on your mobile phone, registration has become streamlined and more convenient. I came to get my test done before a reporting assignment. What's different this time is we get to visit a lab to see how these nucleic acid tests are conducted. The lab operations director told us, on average, it takes about 3 hours to get the results as the technology matures.
This line, called VIC, is a class label, which indicates whether we've got the sample. If we get the sample, it will form a curve like this. The result is negative. Both lines indicate the targets we get from the virus are flat, which means it's negative. If either of them forms a curve, it means the patient is infected with the coronavirus.
This is one of China's largest test kit makers, and its production can provide 500,000 tests a day, which has increased tenfold since the pandemic began.
We selected 3 targets of the virus. Now the government is concerned about coronavirus variants reported in the UK and South Africa. The more targets we label, the more effective the tests are.
The massive amount of testing in China and beyond earlier led to concerns that China may harvest biometric information such as DNA. Experts dismissed the claim, saying that DNA collecting is a different procedure.
After collecting the samples through throat swabbing, through cell lysis, we extract the pathogen's nucleic acid, which is the DNA is not included. The detection results only include the information of virus RNA. For DNA detection, it has to go through DNA sequencing.
Nucleic acid testing has been given a tremendous boost since the pandemic began, and it has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry in China and beyond. China has cut the testing prices by a third, and the rapid tests can produce results in a few hours' time. This has become a new normal in the country, and it's likely to last at least for the foreseeable future. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Shanghai.
Across the world, the normal balance of life and business has been upended by the pandemic. In Tokyo, once bustling restaurants now have growing stockpiles of ingredients as more people stay home.
But rather than waste the food, the hospitality industry is pivoting to a growing demand for frozen meals. Mayu Yoshida reports.
Fewer customers, expensive rents, and shorter business hours.
High-end restaurant Cross Tokyo in the Japanese capital is just one of many struggling during the COVID-19 pandemic.
もう本当に 10% のお客様
Customers have dropped to 10 to 20%. We used to host corporate events, birthday parties, and over 150 weddings every year. All of them now gone.
けどもそういったものも完全になくなって
Japanese authorities have accused restaurants of being the country's biggest source of infection. To make ends meet, eateries like this are increasingly choosing to freeze their food and investing in new technology to do so.
These are veggies picked from the farm. Thinly cut vegetables like these are hard to freeze while preserving their best qualities. But with the right freezer, the right level of temperature, and the right timing, they're able to keep their crispness. Ready-to-eat frozen foods like these are becoming more popular in Japan as more people eat and work at home.
Tokyo-based Daybreak is one company taking advantage. It uses technology to blast cold air and flash freeze food to as low as minus 35 degrees Celsius. The company says this enables longer storage of food without losing its taste and color, and the owners of Cross Tokyo are impressed.
できる限り限りなく新鮮なものをお届けしたいというところを追求されていると。僕らはどちらか
Our restaurant refrigerator can also freeze, but it's for storage. Theirs focuses on keeping food nutritious and fresh. As a professional, we wanted to pursue the latter, even if it costs a lot of money.
ここが一番やっぱり大切だなと思って、そっちにお金がかかったとしても
Refrigeration varies according to things like water content, ingredients, and the size of the food. Daybreak claims that it can find the perfect balance by combining data and advice from nutritionists. Sales for the firm doubled last year as more restaurants moved away from face-to-face services and into food delivery.
普段だったら買わなかったもの、そういうところにお金を使うよ。
Demand of frozen food among consumers is growing rapidly. Eating at home has become a norm, and consumers now want to spend their money on high-quality delivery delicious food. And they also order directly from restaurants to support them. On the other hand, suppliers are struggling to find buyers. That's where high-tech freezing comes in.
やっぱ切り替え入られてるかなっていう。
The frozen food business in Japan goes back to more than a century. With COVID-19 changing life everywhere, restaurants here are turning to tech to secure their future. Mayushida, CGTN, Tokyo.
Now, a chilling end to the show. Let's take you to the most famous waterfall in the world. This is Niagara Falls right now, or more accurately, Niagara Freeze Falls. These breathtaking pictures proving that even this natural wonder was affected by the winter storm that has swept America. Ice usually forms on the river every winter, but for the falls to actually freeze like this, extremely cold weather needs to linger for longer periods. And although they seem to be paused mid-flow, the water actually never stops flowing underneath.
Our main stories again. Boris Johnson has outlined a plan for easing England out of lockdown as new UK data shows vaccines having a spectacular impact on hospital admissions.
Dozens of Boeing 777s have been grounded after an engine fell apart over the US city of Denver.
And China's foreign minister has called for the US to end its suppression of Chinese tech firms and says the door is open for dialogue.
And that's it. Thanks for watching. More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, on the CGTN app, and please follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're available to watch on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion.
Up next, Africa Live. From all of us in London, goodbye.